Hello everyone and welcome to a new discussion which is the concept of NoData and raster. And if you see the title, the NoData something is awkward for might be for many people, but in GIS this concept is very much required. So initially when we started using GIS, it was mainly focused on the vector data handling and analysis. Later on then we got the capabilities in GIS to handle raster data, but then problem came about this that how to keep information about the outside of my area of interest. So for that this concept was developed which is called NoData. NoData means there is some value, but it is not 0. So NoData is not 0. This is the first statement here, and then we will see that how it is important in GIS. As you know that in raster every cell is having its location and a value, and that value is assigned depending, suppose if I am having 8 bits digital elevation model or 8 bit satellite image, then my values might be varying between 0 to 255. That means I can have maximum 256 values. But at the same time we also know that a raster data can only be, because raster is a 2-dimensional matrix, and therefore raster data can only be stored in 2 shapes. One is either square or rectangular. That means the number of rows and columns need not to be the same. If they are same, it is fine, but if it is they are not same, then overall shape of the raster is going to be rectangular. But sometimes when we are dealing some arbitrary boundary, suppose a district boundary or a state boundary, country boundary or a watershed boundary, hydrological boundary, then how I will have this thing, because these are not these boundaries are not in square or rectangular shape. So how these will be handled in raster, especially outside of my study area, so that the entire data becomes either rectangular or square. So keeping this thing in mind, this NoData value is assigned to if there is either no information or insufficient information about the characteristics of location it presents. And that is what the outside, because inside we need to have information, but outside till it gets the shape, overall shape of a square or rectangular. We will see further details also with examples. And as I have already mentioned that NoData does not mean the value is 0. NoData 0 is still a value. I will give you an example that if I am working in a coastal area, and as you know the mean sea level at the near the sea or beach, I will have a 0 elevation. But if I go in towards the seaside, then I should get minus values as well. And if I go towards the land, I will start getting elevation values in positive. So 0 has to be kept for elevation, and therefore 0 is a value. And NoData is also a value, but it is very awkward value which is unimaginable in a data set, and that value is assigned as NoData set. And what happens then, once we assign that this is my value for NoData, that is the information which is outside or insufficient information. Sometimes within our study area also NoData will be there. I would be showing examples. So then this value is recognized by the processing software, that whenever they encounter that value, just avoid it. Do not consider in any kind of calculation or enhancement or any other thing. So that is why it is NoData, just ignore it, but it has to be kept in the system, because overall shape of raster can only either square or rectangle. Now these cell values, you know that either can be positive or negative, or also can be integer or floating points, depending. If I am handling satellite image, then pixel values will be only positive integer value, But if I am handling a grid in GIS, then I may expect positive values, negative values. I may get also integers or floating point or decimal values. And these cells can also have no data value if there is no data or absence of data. That means because I have to even if data is not there, but still overall that raster has to be presented. So, how it would be presented, because I cannot assign 0 value. So, I assign no data value, and no data then can be handled separately through these programs. So, sometimes there are homogeneous areas outside of a boundary in a boundary of our area of interest in a raster data set that you do not want to display, and therefore, also there we use. If I see this schematic, this is what the raster data will look. Only thing which you have to assume that these are not units are not rectangular, they are square, but in display you are seeing this one. So, overall shape can be of this raster can be either square or rectangular. When we do not have any information, like here I do not have any information. So, these things can become, I can declare as no data value. I cannot declare as 0, because 0 is considered as a value, especially in your digital elevation model. So, this concept was very much required. As you can see, this is the real data, and this is the example from SRTM DEM. The SRTM stands for Shuttle Radar Topographic Mission, which was a 16-day mission of NASA to generate a global scale DEM at different spatial resolutions. So, when this mission, and it was based on SAR interferometry techniques, when we will discuss about how digital elevations can be developed, then we will be discussing this part also, that how this using SAR interferometry we can generate digital elevation model. But before that, when this mission was completed, then during processing it was realized that there are various cells in the digital elevation model which are not representing the true elevation values. So, these cells were assigned as no data value, and these areas were generally where the snow peaks or some other, because of some other errors or reasons during data acquisition and the insufficient information was there, or absence of data, and therefore, these cells were assigned as no data. So, that the system would know, and whenever there is a calculation, suppose I develop a slope map from this digital elevation model, then during that calculation these no data values will be ignored. Now, this concept of no data also includes this borders, because in border areas when we are handling an arbitrary boundary raster, then in border areas in the background or other where we can have the no data value, and sometimes these are expressed as no data values, although other times they may have real values. So, in early GIS systems, when no data handling capabilities was not there or was not implemented, or rather not known, we had great difficulties for areas for outside, and we used to do a completely different way to handle this data. So, when we display raster with no data values, sometimes the software automatically assign no data the color, or they assign no color basically. So, it mixes with the background of your screen, and therefore, you do not see anything outside of your arbitrary boundary. However, when we do the stretching over the data, then it has to be remembered by the system, or should be identified, that these values should not be considered in any of these processing. So, that is nowadays it is handled very efficiently. Now, let us take an example, like here this is a Himachal Pradesh SRTM DM, and which using the Himachal Pradesh political boundary I have extracted from that tile. So, when you extract that data, and for the outside of Himachal Pradesh, because overall raster has to be either a square or rectangular. So, what happens to the outside areas? So, outside areas here were assigned black color, and therefore, you are seeing like this. If it is my background of my screen is also black, then I will not see any problem. But if it is not like white, then I would be seeing these black areas, and black areas are nothing but no data. So, now it is just as I have said, the colors do not matter in GIS. What matters is the value. So, we can change that value, and we can say that if value of no data is like this, assigned white color. So, it mixes with my background of my screen, like on the right side with which you are seeing. So, here the user or whoever is visualizing such data set will not experience that black areas, and will not feel that it is either rectangular or square. He would only see the arbitrary boundary. So, the image as you saw, that is a no data area is assigned black color, and whereas the image on the right the same without no color or white color. So, both options are available if background of your screen is white. Generally, we assign white colors because if it has to be printed on white paper, then again there will not be printing like left image, it would be printing on right image, and no black color will be used. So, it looks more realistic also. Now, how we handle in different softwares, example I am taking from ArcGIS, and no data as you know is stored natively inside the grid format, and not only in this grid format, but most of the grid formats which are being used in GIS all can handle very well nowadays. So, this concept of pixels in case of satellite images or cell values in case of a digital elevation model, and that values based on no data is foreign, means it is unknown for other raster formats. So, sometimes if a software has not very well designed to handle no data, then you would have real difficulties. Initially we used to have these problems, but now good softwares, all of them have implemented concept of no data. Now, as you know that ArcGIS treats non-grid raster formats the same as the grid, and no data then is allowed and supported format. So, this is very standard practice that if data is coming from other format, still it will handle. If it is having no data, it will handle as no data. And changing a location in the raster like georeferencing, when we do the georeferencing and after resampling, when there is a change in the data, means there is a change in scale, there is a rotation, and there is a warping or it is fitting the surface, then there will be on the sides, there might be some background or wedges which might be created, which will be bringing this no data zones or no data area. So, if by default if we assign no color, then it will mix with the background and there should not be any issue. So, wedges on the sides of an image or raster not filled with data, and they are basically unknown values. So, they become automatically the no data, and with the like non-grid formats, maybe the satellite images or other data, the areas of no data are stored in auxiliary file, that is .aux next to the raster itself. So, when we store the on our hard disk or any storage devices, then you would see many times that a file having the same initial part, but extension is aux. So, here the information about no data is stored. So, whenever that file is used, suppose I am having a file india.grid, then I will be also having a file india.aux, and whenever I will use india.grid, then this file will also be used to help the system to ignore no data for any kind of calculations. And generally the default value for no data are displayed as transparent, as I have said. Now, here this is again example from ArcGIS, and what you are seeing here that the same digital elevation model of Himachal Pradesh is shown here, and here the point which is important to note is that what it says, display no data as no color. So, here no color has been assigned. That means whatever the background of the screen, it will mix with that. Though the data, overall shape of this data is rectangular. So, remaining areas are having no data values, and which you can also check that what the no data value each layer is carrying, that we will also see little later. Now, here if I use some color instead of no color, then this is what the result is, that I see the background. It does not look nice either. So, here for the no data value a black color has been assigned, and this is what the result on the right side you see. So, when basically doing any kind of calculation or statistics operations on raster data set, then this no data are ignored. With any cell, if it is carrying no data value, that is ignored. And when performing operations on raster data which is containing no data values, there are typically 3 ways that no data is treated for each cell. No data can be returned for the location no matter what, and no data is ignored and a value is computed using any available values, and the third one is a value must be estimated and no data cannot be returned. So, likewise the calculation is done or softwares are designed to handle no data. Now, as you know that no data, like in Himachal Pradesh example, that no data is stored as a mask, that is the part of my raster data set in a.aux file in ArcGIS format, and using a cell value or pixel value in my data set, that is not used as a valid value elsewhere in the data set. So, that means that in every calculation it is ignored. For example, I may be having no data value like this -9999. Now, I am having a digital elevation model of part of Himalaya, and I have extracted for Himachal Pradesh like I have shown. Now, I know that there in real digital elevation model or in Himalayan, western Himalayan terrain, there cannot be any elevation value which would be -999. It is impossible, and therefore, the system for the system it is declared that this is that value whenever it is encountered, please consider as no data and ignore in all your calculations. So, basically this is how the no data is handled. It is very important to understand the concept and utilize whenever we require, because during display sometimes we may encounter problem and the background might be coming black and which is giving a completely wrong presentation. So, in order to avoid that one, no data can be assigned either no color or the color of the background of your screen, and you can get rid of outside area of interest. So, this brings to end of this discussion. Before I close, I would urge you that try to use these whatever the discussion which I am having and giving example of ArcGIS. If you do not have access to ArcGIS or ArcView, ArcView also handles no data without much problem, or IDA software also. But if you do not have access to these software, but you can have definitely access to QGIS, which is a open source software, and try all this thing, explore that how QGIS handles no data. With this I end this discussion. Thank you very much.